just happy to speak to you all. I haven't done an Expanding Our Roots interview in a while, so I'm glad to be able to get back to my roots, no pun intended, and be able to have a conversation. And I'm also very excited to talk to you all because I've interacted with you in passing in different occasions, but I haven't had a chance to actually talk to you both about your story and your foundation. And that's essentially the point of Expanding Our Roots, to get your story. First question is the simplest. I feel as though every journey starts somewhere, and it usually starts from where we come from, where our roots are. So where are you from? Where are you local? Where are you coming from?
I grew up in California, in Southern California, in a family of refugees from Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and also Russia on both sides. And having done a little more research recently, I realized that they on both sides were originally actually from what is now known as Ukraine. My ancestors are really from all over Eastern Europe, and we are Jewish. So they were fleeing various forms of persecution over many centuries.
I was born in the land that is now called Guatemala, in the region of the Quechí. I grew up there with, middle-class family in the city, in the capital. Really close-knit family. Grew up with a lot of cousins all the time, everywhere. And then around the age of 7, my family actually won the diversity visa lottery, and we moved to the northwest suburbs of Illinois, which is like the Chicagoland area. And so I grew up in kind of like these two worlds, right? Where the narrative shifted to like not having family all over all the time, to growing up in a very small, close-knit family with an aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins instead of 50 extended family members around. And so that's where I grew up. Came in the winter of 91, so I had never seen snow. And those are my formative years growing up in 2 worlds, right? Central America and then in the northwest suburbs.
You have very different backgrounds and come from very different parts of the world, but you also are, number one, in New Orleans, and you also are co-directors of Home is Here NOLA. So I want to know, number one, how you all got to New Orleans individually, and then number 2, how you all got connected in the work that you all are doing.
Well, I feel like people end up being drawn into New Orleans because of its energy and because of some deep needs that we all have to, I think, feel connected and be in community. And so ultimately, that's what drew me to New Orleans. I was born in the South and always wanted to come back because I knew something was missing in my understanding of our sense of place and community. And so I had been living abroad in Africa, in West Africa, and had some close friend who was moving to New Orleans and had no other home. So followed her here, and then this became my home very quickly.
Mine was a little different. I always knew after living in the frigid cold that I needed to leave. My partner and I, after college, we were both like, I need to leave. And so he actually worked for a steamship line, and we kind of like traveled all over the US for that position. And we ended up in New Orleans, sight unseen. We just moved, and I agree that there's like this certain calling. It's funny that I always had manifested living, I don't know why it was glamorous to me, and maybe because my initials like LA, I was like, I'm going to live in LA, I'm going to live in LA. Little did I know that manifesting that was Louisiana instead of Los Angeles, right? So once we got here, it was, it felt grounding. And we didn't know that actually my husband's family also has roots here, as well as my family. So we both had great great grands that were here at some point in their life. And so I agree. I echo that. It's a calling that like calls you back.
And we were both called to be in relationship with each other through our work with migrants and refugees. Lilian and I worked together for 6 years here in New Orleans, doing that until we started Home is Here.
Something that you both said reminded me of a conversation that I had with someone many months ago, around a year ago, who said that a lot of times people go to places like New York and Los Angeles or DC, they're trying to be something specific. But when people come to New Orleans, they're just coming to be. Like just be, you know? And I do resonate with that because coming from Baton Rouge, and I'm not a New Orleans native. So what I loved about being in New Orleans when I was at UNO was being able to be in an environment where I could just be myself authentically, but still be close to home. And New Orleans was a good balance for me because it was so different from where I grew up. But if I needed that familiarity of my hometown, I could always drive back an hour and a half to my house in Zachary and be there as well. So it was a good, healthy balance for me, especially being a young adult trying to come into my home as a person.
And also, I think it should be said that whenever we move to a new place, like there is the privilege of us being able to do that and the privilege that we bring with us in being able to just settle into a new place. And I think I would just also share that I come to that with a lot of humility and a lot of like learning, you know, that is ongoing about this place and its history and the people who have been living here before I was. It's been a joyful and painful learning process too, to understand this place.
Would you mind saying more about that specifically?
I don't think we can take it for granted that it feels like the way that it feels for some people. You know, for those of us who have the experience of, you know, feeling more authentic here, that's because of a really rich, very long history and culture that's been built by so many different folks from all over the world. Such a rich and also really painful history here. That's been hard fought for. I think it's so layered that we have this experience in this current moment in time, but it's actually built on so many centuries of like other stories.
So you're a part of something that is bigger than yourself in many ways is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and also like learning those connections, like Lilian was sharing. I think uncovering those connections as we go and our current role in the history and community and dynamics is also a really important part of what we do too. It's just being conscious of the roles that we're playing here in community.
I think that you know, recently, and Julie, you might remember who I'm referring to, but I can't, her name escapes me right now, but recently heard about just the concept of like not being present, but then also like understanding the linear connection to generations, right? And understanding that it is 7 generations before us, 7 generations after us, right? And so like the decisions that we make, the choices that we make and how we show up, right? Like are affected and affect, right? And so like, I think that that's the piece that like understanding that I'm making this a home, and it was also not my home before, and like then the generations that are coming after me, like I have to pay homage to both and understand how to navigate both, right? Like I have a son, and so like he is loud and proud that he was born in New Orleans. And so, you know, that is the piece of him that I'm like, okay, so like, how are we going to navigate that part of you? And how am I going to help you understand what being born in New Orleans means with connections to my ancestry, my husband's ancestry, and all of that. So, yeah, I think that that's the piece, not only personally, but then also, as Julie mentioned, for communities that are arriving to make this their home, right? Understanding that, yeah, like what it takes to actually create that belonging, that piece of, yeah, we are all part of this potentially new New Orleans, you know, and it shifts. And how do we all integrate, and how do we all make sure that like we're all carried?
I think that when we connect to folks who are newly arriving here from other places, including other countries, including those who have fled, you know, persecution, we honor what feels like the deepest level of that, which is not that it's necessarily tied to a physical place, but that we see one another in ourselves. That it's that experience, that very human experience of either yourself having migrated or been displaced, or an ancestor that migrated or was displaced. You know, even folks who are indigenous to this land, many have experienced displacement. It's just such a shared human story. So I think that that's what brings us stakes in our own, you know, kind of collective experience and collective liberation.
Yeah, and I also want to, you know, kind of offer that even if you came after the storm, then New Orleans is still a part of your experience as well, because not everybody comes to the city for the same way. So you're right, you know, there are people who come with a level of privilege because they have a lot of wealth, or they have a lot of opportunity. And then there are people who are looking for opportunities because they didn't have them wherever they're coming from, whatever opportunity looks like. So I think that also is kind of a reconciliation of the idea of New Orleans as a global city, you know, not just a small little town with funky like bands and festivals. It's a city, and a port city that attracts people from all over the world for reasons beyond Jazz Fest and Mardi Gras. So just a lot to wrestle with. But I specifically wanted to kind of hone in on the work, because you mentioned working together. And I wanted to know the journey going from how you initially met and collaborated to when you decided to do the work of starting Homeless Here NOLA. I would love to hear that journey.
So I came to New Orleans and had always worked with like the immigrant Spanish speaking community because I am bilingual, and because, you know, as the values that, you know, kind of are passed down is that like, yeah, you kind of like make sure that you uplift neighbors when they are, you know, potentially don't have the platform that you have, right? And so like using my privilege to like make sure that I sound like this, right? Like I'm aware, but English is not my first language. So, and so I think that coming into this work, I as an immigrant even didn't understand the complexities of immigration and the world of refugee resettlement. And so I kind of came in really green into resettlement work. And so Julie and I met through traditional refugee resettlement at the nonprofit here, Catholic Charities, that is, you know, the only place here in New Orleans that is doing that work of, you know, making sure that they're coordinating with other entities, the UNHCR and other places that are doing all of the processing. And so with that work, it came to like this, like, you know, the pandemic, I think, came into this like point of just like, whoa, I am really perpetuating these systems of exclusion. I am potentially like causing a lot of harm because I'm witnessing, yes, there are people that are fleeing and are, you know, what we call traditional refugees. And, you know, I think that even within itself, the titles cause harm because, you know, there are a lot of people that are displaced internally and externally. And so just kind of coming to terms with that, it was really difficult. It was a difficult time to like be in that realm. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to leave and go to work at a bigger agency. And so I left, went to Texas, and I worked for a large agency, thinking that bigger meant more, meant better, meant I would help more people and like I would do the thing. But in fact, it was doing more harm. And, I was just really unhappy. And so Julie had, for a long time, had been having conversations about how do we call in others? How can we uplift others? How can we include more folks? And why are we the ones that are making the decisions of who gets to call this place home, who gets to call the US home? And so, and Julie, you can speak to this too, but essentially, yeah, we connected, we stayed connected and shared a lot. And in September, she was like, so like, we're growing, we're expanding. There are a ton of people in detention centers in Louisiana. There's just like this moment of, yes, like full circle moment for me, to where I selfishly get to potentially try to heal some of the harm and heal myself of like what was caused by working in these systems. And so that's my piece of it. I don't know if you want to add, Julie.
I think all of us over our lives, if we're lucky, get called into like deeper practice in living a life of like according to our deepest values. And I think in working with immigrant communities here in the Gulf South area, it's really impossible to ignore that there is this massive incarceration complex that's really targeting new migrants and keeping them jailed somewhat invisibly in Louisiana. And it became harder and harder to ignore that was happening, and that nobody, that there are so few people that were really stepping into that space to provide community and build capacity. And so I think a lot of Home is Here's founding was really about responding to the call of the moment, of the people, and like wanting to respond to the most urgent needs and be a part of a community building that felt really of the community and something that was sustainable and not owned by any one person or any one entity.
And I will say that, like, I think that the time spent in the traditional resettlement wasn't for naught. Like, I think there was a lot of learning about different communities, about people and like connecting with cultures and like that. I think I really valued to be able to step outside myself and really learn about our Middle Eastern communities, our Haitian communities, and like what the contributions were and how they connected to like this area, or how they like just learning from other people so much about what resonated with them. And like, even within the landscape, people are like, oh yeah, this reminds me of home. This reminds me of like what it means to be in home. And so I think the work that folks are doing is valuable too. Like, I don't want to discredit that, because it is a need. It just should be for more people, or like there should be other avenues, right? Like, yeah.
I have a two-part question to ask to both of you ladies, because when I think when we talk about issues, we kind of get into what I call an abstract bubble, where we kind of talk about these issues as like, oh my God, systemic racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism. But it's like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? Like what does systemic racism feel like? What does, I call it institutional, I think everything is institutional homophobia or institutional sexism look like for an everyday person? We don't always have those conversations. So I wanted to ask specifically, what does it look like to be someone who has a relative or a loved one in a detention center, and you may live in like a Baton Rouge, New Orleans, but they are in North Louisiana, several, hours away by car. You have to take a car, and that's another obstacle as well. And then also you mentioned calling in people. So how exactly do you go about, as Home is Here NOLA, calling in more people to be involved in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, to give you kind of like a very simple example, I am the point of contact generally for people that are in detention centers trying to reach folks that either they need someone to help sponsor them out, or they have family members, right? And it's as basic, and I, for lack of a better term, as basic as like asking someone, like the ICE deportation officer working in the jail either doesn't have the time or doesn't really care. I don't know, but like it's as basic as asking them, do you speak English? What other languages do you speak? Do you have family? Did you bring a piece of paper with their contact information? So like half of the time that I'm getting these calls, I'm asking questions about like, okay, what was it looking like? What would it have looked like for you to like come to the US, seek asylum, and like live with whom? And they're like, oh, I have a brother or a cousin that is in California. I was on my way to connect with them, and then this happened. And so I go back to the deportation officers and just say, by the way, this person has family, has this, speaks this, and has the support and has all these resources. So one, it's not giving the autonomy and like the power to the person, right? We're not acknowledging that they have a choice of where they're going to go. Two, generally, it's our Black and brown men that are stuck in detention longer, right? And then three, it's usually folks that are, that may or may not have the capacity to communicate their needs, and no one's asking them in the detention centers, like, do you have medical concerns or anything? And so they come out, or I'm having conversations with people and they're like, oh, and my bones were broken and I haven't had medical treatment in a year, and I've been here for 6 months. And so like that's what systemic racism looks like to me. Like just like perpetuating systems of like, you are not a person. You are not someone that deserves. They don't call people by their names. They call them by their bed number.
We call people into this work by offering them an opportunity to be in direct relationship with newly arriving community members, because we really feel like that's what's most transformative in creating change, is starting with like personal relationships of solidarity and learning and growth. And as those relationships evolve, we find that community develops around those relationships of solidarity, and then new systems. The idea is that new systems of mutuality, are created that are, sort of actively anti-racist and more equitable, and allow for some of the healing that Lilian was referring to. So a lot of what Home is Here is actually just building opportunity for people to be in relationship, actually getting people out of jail, actually focusing on Black immigrants who are definitely more impacted by systemic racism of the system, so that they have an opportunity to be free and not be in a cage and be part of a community and have a chance at belonging.
Well, I want to first acknowledge that there's a heaviness because this issue is heavy. So I want to, first of all, thank you all for being vulnerable and honest about the issue. I know you all aren't personally experiencing it, but you are in connection and in solidarity with those who are. And it is very heavy and it is very painful, especially when you see yourself in that person. Because I know both of you have immigrant backgrounds. I know, Lilian, you are Latina, so it's like you have that connection as well, and I'm just really thinking about the fact that when you see yourself in another person, even if you've never experienced that issue, you feel the pain that they're feeling. And that's like, but at the same time though, I'm thinking about the fact that we live in a world of institutional apathy where, it's encouraged for us to lack empathy for people if they look different from us. And even the ways in which we talk about immigration in this country sustain these attitudes towards detained immigrants, regardless of status. When we talk, for example, I'm actually recording in Texas. I'm in Dallas right now, but on my way back from Waco, going to Dallas, I saw a billboard that said from a gubernatorial candidate, Texas is having elections right now. It said, "Don't give illegals our money." And I'm thinking to myself, what you mean our money? Who you don't own that money. Now, I'm not a Texas resident. I'm in Louisiana, but I'm thinking, okay, we're in Texas, whose money is ours? Are you saying ours that because there are immigrants who are also paying taxes, documented and undocumented? So are you saying that they can't benefit from the money that they're putting into the system? And also, I'm sure that person means white. Us white people can't give black and brown people any money. So in many ways, you're saying that we don't deserve to have, and I'm saying we because I am a black person, that we as black and brown people don't deserve to be taken care of by anybody because you don't deem us to be worthy of citizenship. And I have an issue with that. I sense the pain that you all feel, and I also sense the hurt that you all feel as well dealing with this issue. So I hate to ask such a trivial question, but with the type of things that you deal with, how do you keep a sense of hope? How do you take care of yourself? Because we always say, oh, we're gonna tackle this system. You're gonna go to the school board, we're gonna address them, we're gonna, go to the state capitol, we're gonna do this, but that is very draining emotionally when it's a battle, or more so it's a war against injustice as opposed to a battle. So how do you keep yourself hopeful and keep yourself, like practice good self-care and take care of yourself spiritually and emotionally when you're in solidarity with these folks, with folks who are dealing with this, not these folks, excuse my language.
It really helps to have a good partner. Super grateful for each other and shared partnership.
I say hopeful, leaning on communities too. I think that, when folks are released and we stay in connection and I learn of the strides that they're making, the accomplishments, the sense of humanity that they feel restored, like that to me, yes, right? Like that's the yes. And to speak, Jahi, about what you were saying is like, I think that that's the piece, is that we've all been othered and we've all experienced that at some level. Whether, whatever the reason was, we've all been othered, and it hurts. And once you acknowledge that, and once you see what pain it causes others to other and you caused by othering, that's the piece that you like, like this is why I'm not gonna ever not look at like a person and see the humanity and the beauty and like all of the things that they bring. I learned recently that people that are, people that are seemingly invisible, our homeless community, there's actually like something that happens in your brain that like when you see a person, you recall joy and the sense of joy. And yet they're studying people that when they see people that are homeless or in wheelchairs, that is actually like diminishing over time. And so like I make it a point to like never ever not look someone in the eye and like never not see a person as a person, because that piece of othering hurts, and it hurts not only me, but like I mentioned earlier, my future like children and grandchildren and children of grandchildren, right? That piece is like a biological piece that I never want to continue to happen. And so like I want to experience a sense of connection as much as possible with people. And I feel like that's the piece that gives me hope, is like having conversations, creating that space, connecting with people and allowing them, like being a part of what they're sharing. Because whoa, like how grateful and how privileged am I to like learn about people's stories. So
that is something that I can affirm as well with 821. When I first started, this organization in 2016, and I think you all can relate to starting something new and, just trying to find your way through all the noise and stake your claim in the movement. I felt very alone doing this work because I was like, oh, does anyone care about this? Is this an issue? Are these tea and truth dialogues truly resonating with people? Are the spaces that I'm creating, spaces that people actually want? And I remember having moments where I didn't feel like it mattered. And then I remember, during the pandemic, someone mentioned that it was through a tea and truth dialogue that they were able to, realize that the people they were in community with, they were neighbors. They lived in the same neighborhood. So it allowed for them to be able to connect with each other. Or I remember many years ago, it feels like a lifetime ago, back in 2017, I did a dialogue with on religious identity. And you had this openness, you had Muslims talking about Islamophobia, Jewish folks, a rabbi talking about anti-Semitism and violent anti-Semitism that they were facing during the time, and also a queer Black woman talking about homophobia in the church, and having a pastor say, "You are welcome at my church in your queerness. It is okay. We want you here." And then having people that may have never met a Muslim person be able to be exposed to them, that made the work worth it. Like even in the loneliness and in the weeds, the flowers that bloom make the weeds worth it. So I feel like, community, now that I am for 6 years into doing 821, I don't feel alone, because I've, been able to connect with so many people through the interview series with Expanding Our Roots. I've been able to make connections with people that I may have never had. I mean, I've literally emailed people to ask to interview them, and then that I've never even seen in person. And they're like, "Yeah, let's do it." And since then, we're like Facebook friends. We're on LinkedIn. We talk. And then also we're learning that the interview series has been of objective benefit to people. Like one of the people I interviewed actually got a huge donation to their organization because somebody watched the interview. So just feeling as though everything what you do has a purpose and you're not alone in the work is definitely something that can restore you when you're feeling depleted.
Yeah, it's all about our connection to one another. It's all about the relationships. Like when we cultivate, community resettlement groups who are sponsoring people out of detention that they have never met in their life, that they do not know the first thing about that person. They don't know how to speak their language. They don't know their culture. They don't know where they're coming from. And yet somehow they prepare themselves to be community with one another and with that person. It is a sacred, experience. And they often say, as they're preparing and training to be, in healthy relationship with each other for that, they often say, community members, I know what it feels like in my own way to not belong. I've experienced this. I've had my own suffering in my life. And I want to be a part of belonging with someone. Like I want to be a part of that. And it's really, really hopeful and beautiful to see folks coming together around that relationship building. And to me, that's like the most fundamental piece of solidarity work and creating this cloth, So it is hopeful. I totally resonate with what you're saying, Jahi, about it's just, sometimes it's one relationship at a time, but it can really be transformative.
And one relationship can lead to 10 can lead to 100 will lead to 1,000.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And then it's whole communities in the movement.
I don't want the conversation, personally speaking, to be centered on the mass incarceration and deportation machine of immigrants, because I looked at your website. I've had several conversations with you off camera. You don't just focus on incarceration. You focus on a myriad of other issues and other ways to build community with immigrants in the Gulf South region. So my question to you is, in addition to the incarceration issue, what are some other issues or projects that you all have to build community and to build solidarity with immigrants in the Gulf South region?
Something that I think that, we just turned one. So, something that I think that we're learning and wanting, and from the beginning, I think we wanted to do is recognize that leadership has to be within the communities that have the lived experience, right? And so one of the areas of focus right now that we are wanting to expand on is increasing that leadership and having folks that were affected by the systems of incarceration lead movements, organize, have potentially start like an advisory council on what this looks like, what it looks like to, call in others and develop their own whatever leadership it is that they feel called to do. And so they kind of like have folks from all over, because that's what we're seeing. We're seeing folks are not just Latinx community members. There are Ethiopian, Eritrean, folks are from all over that are being incarcerated. And so that's our hope, is to create that and then to cultivate kind of the ownership, because we are not the ones that should be leading any kind of movement, right? It should be coming from folks that have the experience. And so, that's one piece of it. I think that in addition, Julie mentioned too, increasing capacity, right? The barriers and all of that exist within the systems, whether it's a federally funded benefit or whatever it is, don't allow access for folks who are actually, also in need of some kind of support just to work towards autonomous living. And so that is the piece. There are wonderful mutual aid partners that we partner with here in New Orleans who do amazing work, and we don't want to duplicate any of that. And so connecting, what we do a lot of is connecting folks and learning about other folks that are already doing pieces of what is needed to support someone through their integration into the New Orleans area. So whether it's basics, or a little bit more of community navigation. So whatever that means to folks. Julie, I don't know if you want to speak about other projects.
Really concretely, we talked to lots of partners and immigrants about what they wanted to see, and a lot of it is capacity building around legal aid and housing, which are two areas where there's just like an ever-growing need for support. So we are doing a lot of partnership building to increase capacity in those areas. We train pro bono attorneys to take on asylum cases for free for folks. We're building a network. We have a really ever-growing network of hosts and property owners who are opening up their homes for free or for low cost for newly arriving community members to live in, and building infrastructure long-term that will allow for affordable housing for newly arriving community members and will allow for them to access free legal aid. So it's not just like in the now on a case-by-case basis, but like sustainably. And of course, the heart of our program is really to just continue to build these community resettlement groups and cultivate more and more the primary sort of like mutual aid groups for folks who are getting out of jail so that they can continue to pursue their asylum claims and have a community of support here in the US somewhere.
Yeah, and as we move through this hopefully last phase of the pandemic, right? We're also looking toward having a community center that is like a physical space for all of us to gather, for people to use for workshops or for a coffee or for like whatever it is that the community really wants to use that space for. That's like our vision, is to have it like an inclusive space for folks to have their meetings or whatever it is that the need is.
So much centered around community building that has advocacy, that has support, logistical support, housing support, has cultural exchange, like so much more. And I wanted to make sure to ask that question because I didn't want people to watch or listen to this and think, oh, they only just focus on, people in jail. But no, I wanted you all to say exactly what you focus on beyond that, but also highlighting that is an issue that is something that hits hard for so many people, because for so many immigrants in this community, that is a reality for them. And I've spoken to other organizations across the South who also have incarceration as their number one issue. You know, it may not be the only issue, the issue that is impacted, that is hitting people the hardest at this present moment is the deportation machine. And it's so vivid because for me, and this is just me editorializing, it's been done with such impunity and cruelty.
Yeah.
And it's
you cannot work in solidarity with immigrants or Black people or people of color or trans folks in this country without coming into contact with the incarceration system, with the criminalization of people. Like, it is impossible to really avoid working with and against that system.
exactly.
Yeah.
And even if you don't work on that issue, because it may be impossible, you know, not everybody can be a lawyer or an aide or do pro bono work. Not everyone, I know I don't have a law degree, and some people don't have the capacity to do the work that you're doing, Lilian, or to actually be a facilitator between those who are locked up and those who are not. But we can have knowledge and an awareness of these issues and build programs that acknowledge that as well and don't entirely ignore it too. And I think that's for me what inclusivity is, not just having people at the table, but making sure that there are seats reserved for those who aren't at the table too.
Right.
You know?
Like safely acknowledging the seemingly invisible communities, right?
Mm.
Like safely like calling people in to just say like, this is what's happening.
And that's why, and also our language matters and words matter. That's why I had to check myself and I said these folks, because they're not these folks, they're not on an island. There are people, you know, like there are people, even if if people don't look like us or speak our language, there are people. So it's not these folks, it's our folks, our people, you know.
Yeah, and we also, for that reason, like frequently say that it's not that we're inviting them to a table, it's like they're building their own table. And like communities are building their own table, you know, sort of together, to help with some of that like equity, you know, language and relationships. Because I think that especially like immigrant communities, and I'm not an immigrant, so I don't mean to speak for them, but I do hear this a lot, that like they frequently feel like they should have to feel grateful or like they're invited to something. Whereas like true equity would mean that, you know, they were building their own lives for their own communities. And so that's part of what we're trying to build here, is communities building around and with and led by immigrants.
We're gonna have to find the time to talk off camera because I have so much to talk about beyond this conversation, but this has to be edited. So, you know, we can't go on forever and ever, but I do have two final questions. You mentioned that you're a year old, and I remember when I started A21, and I remember what it felt like to be like, wow, I've been doing this for a year. And so one of the things that I kind of was often asked is, what do you envision for A21? What do you want to happen next? You know, what is your goal? What is your end game? And now that I'm 6 years old, I don't have the answers to that question as clearly because so much has changed since 2017 and 2022. However, I'm going to ask you all that question. You know, what do you envision for Home is Here NOLA, you know, when you are 2, 5, 10 years old? What do you envision as an organization? And also the second to last question I want to ask specifically is the elephant in the room. Why do you do this work? Why is this important to you? You know, I can hear you, I hear you all talk about these issues, but why this work? Why immigrants? Why, you know, refugees? Why specifically these communities? You know, I want to end the interview with the why. Why do you do this work?
Funnily enough, we're in that middle phase of planning our what's next or trying to figure it out. Skipping ahead from year 2 to year 5 to year 10, my vision is that there are no detention centers, right? That like we don't exist because that's what our job is anymore. We exist because we want to continue to create belonging. We want people to continue to be in community, and it's a shift, right? Like potentially, you know, I don't know what it would look like, but in my vision, ICE centers shut down. Like that's like my dream, right? And the why, I think, you know, I spoke about a little bit about this, is just like when I got into like resettlement work, it was because my family coming into this country was supported and uplifted by other community members that we met along our path, whether they were Latinos or not, right? We were uplifted through different connections, and I didn't know it at the time, right? Because, you know, we have this like dual culture kind of like teenager-y Lilian that like doesn't understand if she's like Latina or American or like all these things. So I didn't know it at the time, but you know, after like my mid-20s, I think I came into this just understanding of my position and my privilege, and not even knowing that as like an immigrant and a Latina and a, you know, brown female, I had always had this hat on that like I have to do all the things, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, but I have so much. I have this like platform that I can use to just be like, come on, y'all, come on in, like let's do this, and not even me, and then like, you know, can potentially harvest that leadership. And so like that is, I think, my why. My why is that I want to change the narrative of what it means to be an immigrant in the US and what it means to be you know, a brown person in the US and what it means to be a woman in the US. And like, yeah, I think that that's the piece that that I think that, yeah, we should be calling up. I think that representation is huge, right? And so when you see more and more people that are in leadership positions organizing to abolish a lot of systems that perpetuated all of our divisions and perpetuated the haves and have-nots, and like, you know, all of that yeah, that I want to be a part of the dismantling of that, and like call in others to like continue to dismantle those systems. And so my why is that yeah, I had limited exposure to organizers and women of color in positions where they could use their platform for something. And I wanna, yeah, that I, yeah, I think that it's important to make sure that, you know, our future generations have just all of the voice, and that we don't ever take that away from people.
I 100% agree with what you said, Lilian. And also want to contribute that this work is a calling for me because I see myself in every, you know, every newly arriving migrant or immigrant that comes. And I feel like love. I feel most myself, most authentically myself, and most loved and most loving when I am in relationship with newly arriving migrants. And part of that is because of the millions of moments and people and experiences that have built up my understanding of what it means to be in migration and to be displaced. Like, life is so precarious. Life is so fragile for all of us, whether we are in migration or not. And, you know, newly arriving folks carry that with them. And I just really, and the strength that comes with living in that like moment to moment existence, that I think is just very empowering. And I feel like if they're not free, you know, if this person can't be free, then I cannot be free. And so it feels very loving and empowering to be in relationship with newly arriving migrants. And so that's I think a vision for the future is, you know, communities without cages, newly arriving and existing community members feel known, they feel cared for. Healing, can occur from all of that collective trauma that we carry in this society. People are hopeful about their future because everyone is cared for, and that we're sort of just growing. We're creating these circles where that can happen and growing these circles to be greater and greater containers for that.
So I have nothing else to say other than thank you all for sharing your work and being vulnerable about the depths that it takes you when you do this work. I would love to support us with 821 in terms of being a part of that work as well, as best as I can and as best as we can. And I also just, send love and affirmation to those who are struggling with having loved ones in, detention centers and dealing with that uncertainty on top of the uncertainty that we're already dealing with. And I'm also just wanting to send love to, the people who are coming to this community of the Gulf Coast to South Louisiana, seeking opportunity and seeking a better life and just seeking themselves as well. Because it's so hard to be human in a world that's constantly making us feel less than. It is hard to be human, but it is so beautiful to be human when we remember that we are human.
Amen.